All right, so today we're diving into something kind of different. You know those tiny earbuds everyone's wearing these days? The Indian wearables market is exploding, and we're about to unpack how one company in particular, Bolt Audio, is making serious waves.
Yeah, they've really carved out a niche for themselves. And what's fascinating is they've done it all without any major outside investment.
That's the crazy part, right? They're going head-to-head with these VC-backed giants and somehow coming out on top.
We actually have a fantastic interview with Bolt Audio's co-founder, Varun Gupta, that we're going to be unpacking today.
He doesn't hold back either. Really gives you a behind-the-scenes look at their whole playbook.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. For anyone who might not be familiar, we're talking about TWS earphones here.
True wireless stereo, to be precise.
Hmm.
And it's not just a fad. TWS now accounts for a staggering 55% of the total audio market in India. 55%. Seriously, I knew they were popular, but that's mind-blowing. So we're talking about those tiny earbuds that connect to your phone wirelessly. What was it? Barun said something like they've outsold neckbands, wired headphones, pretty much everything else.
Yeah, he said something like 12% market share in a market valued at 4,000 crore rupees. It's an absolute gold mine, and everyone's vying for a piece of the pie.
It makes you wonder what shifted the market so dramatically. Why have TWS earphones become so dominant?
Well, you can't underestimate the impact of e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Flipkart. They've become the de facto storefronts for these products. A staggering 75% of TWS sales happen online.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where I had a bit of an aha moment. I always thought going direct to consumer, the whole DDC thing, was supposed to be the holy grail for profitability.
Oh.
But Varun kind of flipped the script on that one.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, right? Cut out the middleman, bigger profits. But it's not always that simple.
He was saying that the cost of customer acquisition online is astronomical, especially for a smaller brand trying to compete with the big guys.
And while platforms like Amazon and Flipkart have their own costs, Varun's point was that once you establish yourself on their platform, there's huge potential for organic growth.
It's like hitching a ride on a rocket ship that's already taken off, instead of building your own rocket from scratch.
Precisely. And here's another curveball. Offline sales, as traditional as they seem, are often more profitable in the long run.
Really? I would have thought with all the overhead of physical stores.
It's definitely more capital intensive upfront. But Varun broke down all these hidden costs associated with D2C that most people don't even consider.
It's like the tip of the iceberg, right?
Exactly. You've got marketing, customer service, returns, the cost of building and maintaining your own online store, not to mention the expectation of lightning fast, free shipping, all cutting into those margins. Varun mentioned that a lot of brands are actually running their D2C channels at a loss, treating it more as brand building.
Interesting. So they take a hit up front, hoping to cash in on brand loyalty later.
You got it. And that brings us to the heart of Bolt Audio's strategy, a slow, steady approach focused on building a sustainable business model. And they started with an unbelievably small budget. We're talking an initial purchase order of just 15 lakh rupees. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Seriously, that's like pocket change in the world of electronics. How did they even get started with so little capital?
Well, back in 2017, they really didn't have much choice but to outsource production to China.
Right. Varun mentioned that India just wasn't as equipped for sourcing those specialized components back then.
Exactly. Things like semiconductors, batteries, even packaging, a lot of it was coming from overseas. But it's interesting to see that shifting now.
Yeah, he seemed optimistic about the whole Make in India
Mm-hmm.
initiative. And he said Bolt has already started moving some production back home, right?
They have, which is fantastic. Creating jobs, supporting the local economy, it's a win-win. But going back to those early days, can you imagine the pressure they must have faced to take venture capital? Everyone and their brother was chasing those big funding rounds.
It's the classic startup dilemma, right? Do you grab the quick cash and risk losing control? Or do you stick to your guns and potentially miss out on a massive opportunity? What made them resist that temptation?
Varun was very candid about that. It was a tough decision. They knew taking VC money would come with strings attached pressure to scale at a pace they weren't comfortable with.
Not to mention potentially sacrificing their long-term vision to appease investors. It's a slippery slope.
Exactly. And remember, they were entering a market that was already dominated by giants, like Boat and Noiseboat, for example, was reportedly pulling in 30 crores in revenue at the time.
So talk about an uphill battle. Going up against those guys with limited resources would have been a David and Goliath situation, to say the least. So how did Bolt differentiate themselves in such a crowded market?
They identified a gap that other brands had largely ignored: aesthetics. While their competitors were busy cramming features and slashing prices, Bolt zeroed in on the design and emotional appeal of their products.
It's almost like they realized that people weren't just buying a gadget. They were buying an extension of themselves, a statement.
Precisely. It's that same principle behind those iconic Apple ads. Simple, sleek, aspirational. They tapped into that desire for products that reflect your personal style.
Form meets function. But did Bolt rely solely on instinct for their designs, or was there more to it?
This is where it gets really interesting. They were surprisingly data-driven even in those early days. Get this. They launched their first products on a fashion platform. Not an electronic site, a fashion platform.
A fashion platform. That's brilliant. So unexpected, but it makes perfect sense. They were tapping into an audience that truly understands the power of aesthetics.
It was a stroke of genius, really. They were able to gather valuable data on what designs, colors, even price points resonated with their target audience, all before diving headfirst into the cutthroat world of mass electronics.
Gathering intel while their competitors were busy building bigger factories. That's classic Bolt. They were playing the long game from day one, and it paid off big time. But let's get down to brass tacks here. They had the style, they had the vision, but what about the actual products themselves? Did the substance match the hype? So they cracked the code on style and brand appeal, but was it all smoke and mirrors, or did Bolt products actually deliver on the performance side of things?
That's the real test, isn't it? And based on their track record, I'd say they were playing the long game here, too. Remember how they were one of the last major brands to launch a smartwatch?
Right. They weren't in any rush to jump on the bandwagon.
Varun actually addressed that in the interview. He said they weren't going to release a product until they knew it could stand up to the competition. And that meant investing heavily in R&D, understanding the intricacies of things like heart rate sensors and motion tracking algorithms.
So not just slapping their logo on some generic off-the-shelf components and...
Yeah, not at all. They went the extra mile to develop their own proprietary algorithms for things like calorie tracking and sleep analysis. They were obsessed with accuracy.
And it paid off, right? Didn't Varun mention that their smartwatches were on par with some of those premium international brands when it came to accuracy?
He did. He actually claimed they surpassed some of them in certain areas, talked about a margin of error of less than 2% for heart rate and step tracking, which is pretty impressive considering how many fitness trackers out there are notoriously inaccurate.
That's wild. It's like they sweated the small stuff, even if most consumers wouldn't even know the difference.
Exactly. They were focused on building that trust factor, proving that their products weren't just pretty faces. And speaking of knowing their customer, that brings us to another brilliant aspect of their strategy, the whole minimum viable audience concept.
Right. Varun talked about how identifying that core group of ideal customers was crucial to their success. But it's more than just basic demographics, right?
Way more. It's about understanding their lifestyle, their pain points, even their daily commute. Varun gave this fascinating example of how they discovered a huge chunk of their customer base were two-wheeler owners, people who rely on scooters and motorcycles to get around.
How did they figure that out?
Oh,
Through sales data, traffic patterns.
exactly. They dug into the numbers and realized that public transport wasn't as prevalent in certain areas and age groups as they initially thought. And that completely changed their approach to product development. They started focusing on features like wind reduction technology for their earphones, specifically targeting people who are constantly on the go and battling noisy environments.
Talk about knowing your customer. It's like they were riding shotgun with them, observing their every move.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And it went beyond just the tech specs, too. Varun mentioned how they started incorporating vernacular languages into their marketing materials, even when targeting higher income demographics. Turns out, it resonated way more than sticking to English.
It seems so obvious in hindsight. But it just goes to show how deeply they understand their audience. It's about connecting on a cultural level, not just a transactional one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's ultimately what sets Bolt apart. They're not just selling products, they're building a brand that people trust and connect with. So the million-dollar question is, can someone just copy their formula? Can you bottle up that Bolt magic?
Right. Can some other company just swoop in, replicate their designs, and steal their thunder?
Varun acknowledged that the threat of white labeling is always there. Someone could try to copy their homework, sure, but what they can't replicate is the brand, the story, the years of dedication and customer centricity that Bolt has poured into their products.
Exactly. You can reverse engineer a product, but you can't fake authenticity.
Yeah.
It takes time to build that kind of trust and loyalty. And that's ultimately Bolt's secret weapon.
It's a great lesson for any business, really. Sometimes, slow and steady wins the race. Focus on building a quality product, understanding your customer, and the rest will follow. It's not always about chasing the quick buck or chasing the next big trend.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's about staying true to your vision and building something meaningful. It's been fascinating to break down Bolt's journey, and we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have.
Until next time, keep those earbuds tuned and those insights flowing.